Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. So next up on the list is a dresser slash changing table. Yeah, my first grandchild is on the way and their parents have requested a changing table, and we're going to do a dual purpose deal out of this where it will actually have two tops, and one will be the changing table, which will just eventually go away over time, but we'll get to that. And of course the second top will be a little thicker, a little nicer, and can be added to this later. So I have the basic material all milled up here, and you see over my shoulder here I have some 1/2-inch walnut plywood. Again, rough cut. Everything is oversized pretty much at this point. But let's dive in, show you. I'll put a picture up here of my rough SketchUp drawing. This was just something to keep me on track, and it's already changed, and I'm only milling lumber. So let me get a little better view of this lumber, and I will show you what's going on. So initially in the drawing, I had set these legs to be about 1.5 inches square, and I thought they looked a little spindly on this piece. And again, like I said, all of this stuff was way oversized. And I did the initial milling on it, and I came out, and man, they just came out great. Everything is dead on. So I think I'm going to go ahead and take all this extra size that I got. So I'm straying from my plan, but that's okay. We can do that. I created a small template here so we can chamfer the feet, and I just laid that on each one. I've also labeled which part I want for where, and of course this big piece of sapwood here, it was still kind of a nice piece, and it's the upper rear rail. You're never going to see this. And then of course these are all of my side pieces, and I don't know if you can tell or not, but this one out here I have marked on the face as spare, but it's actually got a number on here. Now all of these came out of the same board, so the grain matchups were nice, but my spare had a knot down here that actually went all the way through. So I didn't want to deal with that, so I actually took my spare, which was this one, and brought it up here, and the grain matched up pretty well. It's got a little bit of sapwood down in here, but I think we're going to cut some curves in this, so we'll see what's there. I'm not too concerned with just that little piece of sapwood. And we're doing traditional joinery on this one, so no domino. This will all be mortise and tenon joints, and that's what we're going to do today. I'm probably going to go ahead and at least rough these feet out, if for no other reason than to help keep me oriented when I'm laying out for the joinery. So next up, we're going to cut some feet. So I'm just going to rough these out over here at the bandsaw, using my new Laguna 18-inch bandsaw, which is a pleasure to use, by the way. So I'll give you a little closer up view of this as we cut them. So I'm setting up for the top rails first, and I've set up a whole series of squares, and I'll show you what's going on. I'm going to roll my two faces to the out. So now everything I reference from is off of this face side. And I know I'm coming 1/2 inch down. And by the way, these are cut to their final length. I also know I'm coming 1/2 inch in from the outside edge. So I can put that line on there. I should have carried this mark over further. That's okay. And I also know that these are going to be 3/8 inch thick because my material hit 3/4, so that splits nicely in thirds. So I've set up that square. For some reason it's showing up better on this one, but once I get a guide rail set, it's kind of irrelevant. And then I know I wanted a wider tenon, so I'm going to come 2 inches down. Now my material is only 2 1/4, and I got a half up here, so I'll have to remember to reset my height before cutting that lower shoulder at the table saw, but we can do that. And just like that, the top mortises are all marked out and ready to go to the bench. I'm going to lay out the bottom ones exactly the same way, and then we'll go to the bench and start routing some mortises. Okay, so as usual, I'm running a dual edge guide. I've got a 3/8 bit spiral bit in the router, and I'm going to mark my start and my stop point. Because I'm not running dust collection, it's really hard to see those points. But I do have my depth stop set, and so we're just going to route out these mortises now. And I'll bring the camera in closer so you can get a closer look. So I've installed the dado stack on the saw, and I've set the fence to the inside here of the blade at 1 inch, which is the depth of my mortises, and I ran a test piece. Now this test piece fits a little too snug, but it allows me to clean up these cheeks a little bit to match each mortise as we go. So all I'm going to do now is cut all of these parts, and then we'll readjust the height and start dialing in for the proper fit. Okay, so the only correction I made was to raise the level of the blade to match the 1/2 inch for the top down, and I've labeled all of the parts so I know which get this particular cut or notch, if you will. And all I'm going to do now is cut all of these parts. And now I've reset the blade height for about 1/4 inch high and run my test piece, and it fits very well. I did have to round the corners on this to do an appropriate test, but I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So now all I'm going to do is go ahead and run all of these pieces. So I prefer to round off the tenons rather than square up the mortises. To me, this is just way faster and a lot less work. And the important part is this glue surface. So I'm going to start rounding these off and then test fitting them in the mortises that I have them planned for, and they're all still labeled. So that's what's next. So I'm going to try to do this backwards for the camera, but I prefer to come in here in the bottom and just split this grain just a little bit, and then I will chisel down, but only in the bottom, and kind of get that rounded off. I'll work up just a little bit, but not all the way. And when that's good and round, then I will take a file and start working to make that round. And this is all backwards for me, so I apologize. Just like that. Now I have a whole bunch of these to go, and to match them up with their correct mortises, I may have to take a shoulder plane and do a little work on these faces. But I'll see you all in a couple hours, and these will all fit nicely. So there's the first dry fit. It really came together nice. It is dead square, which I'm super excited about. I could have done this way faster with the domino, but I wanted to use traditional mortise and tenon on this one. So tomorrow when I come out here, I think we'll start working on these curves and of course the grooves. Well, not on this face, but back here and in the sides to take the 1/2 inch plywood. And then we'll work on getting everything sanded up as well. While I've got it here, tomorrow I will go ahead and mark the locations for the drawer locations or where these web frames go and start getting some measurements for those as well. So I'm not taking this thing apart and putting it back together too many times. So I will see you guys in the morning when we do curves, grooves, panels, more routing, all kinds of fun stuff. So when I came out this morning, it dawned on me that I did not make these rails quite long enough. I accounted for 18-inch drawer glides, but I didn't account for the drawer material. So I spent my morning remaking those parts. And we're in good shape now, so we're good to go. I also created a story stick, turn it around for you, for my drawer locations so that I could transfer those marks to each of the legs, and they're all on there because we're going to put those 3/4 inch web frames in here, and they're not quite 3/4 because it's 3/4 plywood, so it's a little narrow, but they'll all go in there. And I also created templates for the subtle curves that are going to go in, and they're not big curves, they're just very subtle, but I've also marked where all of those curves grow, and I know you can't really see it on this camera, but I've also marked everything that gets a groove. And just like the last project, these grooves won't go in here until, or the curves won't go in until after the grooves go in, or dados, or whatever you want to call them. So that's what's up next. I'm going to get a little help. I'm going to pull all this apart, and I'm going to do grooves in these next, and then put the curves on them, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to notch legs. So when we put it all back together again, I can take the measurements for those web frames and we can get those cut. Okay, I've got the dado stack set back up in the table saw, and I was able to use one of those bum pieces to make a test to make sure that my 1/2 inch plywood fit well in there. And I've set all my pieces up here. Now all my pieces are labeled so that all I have to do is grab them and put them in. My face frame will always go against the fence, and I spent a lot of time marking notes as to which side gets the groove. So all I'm going to do is go ahead and cut all these parts, and then once these are all cut, I will go back to the ones that get the arch, raise the dado stack, and get a deeper groove in those. Then we'll go to the arches. So next up, we're just going to start cutting these curves. So next up is just a lot of sanding on these parts. Now I've taken all of my rail parts and ganged them together with the thin sides on them in the middle, just to help protect those, because those are a little bit brittle. So I'm just going to spend a while getting this stuff sanded up. Okay, so there's all the curves in. I'm pretty happy with those. I may do a little finessing still, and obviously some roundovers and things. But we'll get there. For now, I needed this dry fit so that I could mark the locations in the legs for the grooves in the legs. And that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to groove these legs to accept the panels. Now I've taken great care to still leave all my notes on here about no grooves in any of this stuff up front, because this is all drawers. But the rest of this all gets grooves. Okay, I'm set up at the bench. I got the piece clamped in place. I did create a couple of 1/4 inch catch blocks, if you will. They just have notches in them this size. Clamped them on so this piece doesn't move. And I'm set up with the dual edge guide. You can do this with a single edge guide. This just makes it idiot proof for me. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to route these grooves. And all these grooves are going to 3/8 of an inch deep. I am set up with a 1/2 inch spiral bit, and I ran a little test to make sure it fit my plywood, and all that is good. So now all I'm going to do is route these grooves. So next up is the notches in the legs, and this is for the web frames. Now I've showed this in previous builds, and I've even did a standalone video on how I build this jig. And these are just a one-time use jig. But I will give you a closer up view of it, and I'll also link in the show notes to where I build a jig like this. It's really quite simple. I have a guide bushing in there. I have a 3/4 bit, and I've set the depth to 3/8 in. And I put a little backer plate on it and clamped it in place. I put a couple of stop blocks on it so that every one of these mortises or notches comes out exactly the same. I've clamped 2 legs together, so I'm doing one side at a time of the entire piece, and then I'm holding the whole thing down with a hole fast. So all I'm going to do now is simply fire this router up and pull this mortise. Then when we're all done, we'll come back and we'll square up those mortises, but that's just a little bit of chisel work and goes pretty quickly. Okay, so there you see the mortise all cut. This side up here will be the front of the case, and we'll of course square that off with a chisel. And then this groove right here is the back panel in the case. So this just runs right into there, but it gets a little support out of that back leg. So let me cut the rest of these, and then we'll go ahead and square these off. So now with all these notches routed out, I'm just going to go ahead and take chisel and start squaring up these corners. All right, well there's a nice dry fit of the side panels. These are all ready for pretty much final sanding and glue up. But I'm going to do that off camera. I notice this one is running pretty long. So when we get back after it again, we will of course finish glue up on the entire case and get those web frames and all that stuff in and get going on drawers. And then of course we got a couple of tops still to build. So until next time, guys, take care.